Radical Secular, a video series dedicated to the separation of church and state and the pursuit of justice.
Hello and welcome back to the Radical Secular. I'm Christophe Defoe.
I'm Sean Prophet.
We're going to do something a bit different today. This is our final episode of the year, and as such, we're going to do a little bit of reflection on where we've been as individuals, as a show, as a nation, as a civilization, and all of that. But first, we're going to talk to you about the status of the COVID-19 relief bill, the lawlessness of Trump's presidential pardons, and the Nashville bombing. And before we get into any of that, I want to remind you to make sure to subscribe to this podcast, leave us a good rating, write a review of our show, and tell your friends and family. Word of mouth really does matter.
Email us at theradicalsecular@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at @radical_secular. Follow us on Twitter at @radicalsecular. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, podcasts at Apple, Google, Spotify, and Stitcher.
Okay, now let's get right into those t-shirts. Sean, you want to go first?
Yes, well, I am wearing, because of the holiday season, I have a Merry Krampus t-shirt.
Woot woot. We love Krampus. I love it. There was a really, really great Simpsons episode about this. And, you know, Krampus is the dude who looks kind of like the devil. But it was really great. They did a great, I think the Simpsons did a great episode of this years ago, and Family Guy did a great episode about it. And tell us about the shirt, Sean, and Krampus.
Honestly, I don't really know that much about the story of Krampus, other than the fact that it's like you said, it looks like kind of a bit of a Baphomet Pan kind of a character, and maybe it's also a little variant on like Elf on the Shelf kind of. He knows what you've been thinking. You know, he knows when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. It's a little bit of that kind of a carrot and stick for children.
Yes. And you know what I think and now I'm really just firing from the hip here, but I think Krampus also has this sort of like redeeming quality where like he really actually loves the children in the end, right? Like he's not actually evil. Like he wants children to do the right thing, like for them, right? Like it's in the long run, taking your medicine is good for you, right? And I think that is sort of the theme of Krampus, and I think, I think I'm pretty sure, no, it was American Dad. They did a whole thing where it's actually Santa Claus was the evil one, and Krampus turns out to be Santa Claus was like sort of like this sociopath who just tries to like trick children into doing things by giving them what they want. And meanwhile, Krampus was the guy who actually cares. And so he cares about discipline, and he cares about teaching children about value. So anyway, sort of like this sort of flip of it. So, and that I think is consistent with the way we think about things on this show, you know?
Yeah, well, I was just kind of, I bought this shirt because I just kind of like to poke my finger in the eye of traditions and things like that. So, it's I'm not always all that serious about it, but I just think it's kind of funny. And that's where I'm at. And I didn't bother to look it up before the show. Sorry about that.
Hey man, we're just having fun. And I'm rocking a Wonder Woman shirt today. And so I got this shirt from on a slow boat from China. I was unable to find it like on Instagram. I'm sorry, on Amazon or anything. And I ended up having to get it from China. And, it's a size large, but it's like really pretty small because it's like for the Asian market. So it's like smaller human beings, like literally, right? So anyway, here we go.
Nice. Wonder Woman shirt. Looks good.
Yes. And so the point here is that the Wonder Woman movie new Wonder Woman movie just came out. And I think superheroes we're actually going to do a show about superheroes. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. And it's going to be so fucking fun. We're going to have Drew on, our buddy Drew on to talk to us about that. So, but the point is that Wonder Woman is awesome because she flies in the face of all of the typical ideas about what a superhero is, about what masculinity is, what femininity is, right? She is not a damsel in distress at all. And I've loved the first movie. And we talk about poking in the eyes of people. I like wearing this shirt because I got a lot of guys that are like, oh, Wonder Woman's not like, or she's not like, whatever. She's like a real
superhero.
She's not a real, she's lame. And I'm like, no, fuck you, man. Like she is. is. She's badass. And in fact, watching that first movie and watching her just slash and burn through through the Germans was just amazing. So anyway, that is why I love that shirt.
Great. Awesome.
So let's get into the news. We're going to have a pretty laid back show today. We're sort of firing from the hip a lot. We have some notes, but we are trying to keep it kind of loose. But there's nothing funny or loose about the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's talk about that. The Associated Press reports Trump spent his Christmas. This just fucking pisses me off. Golfing in Florida as a government shutdown looms and COVID relief hangs in the balance. Trump had no events on his public schedule after throwing the future of a massive COVID relief and government funding bill into question. Failure to sign the bill would deny relief checks to millions of Americans and force a government shutdown. And my favorite is this: without giving any details, the White House said only that Trump would work tirelessly through the holidays as he has many meetings and calls. Anyway. Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi and Steve Mnuchin are trying to salvage the deal. Democrats will vote on Monday on Trump's $2,000 proposal, though it'll almost certainly die in the Republican-controlled Senate. They're also considering a vote on Monday on a stopgap measure that would at least avert a federal government shutdown and keep the government running until Biden is inaugurated. Sean, why do you suppose Trump threw this political grenade into the midst of these negotiations? Is he just a piece of shit?
I mean, he's Assolini. So what do you expect? Exactly. He's just, I mean, this is it's very serious and it's deadly serious.
It really is.
I was thinking about this in the shower today about how just my feelings towards America and what's going on right now. And it's just very hard. It's kind of like being in a city where there's a hurricane forecast and everybody's been telling people prepare, stockpile water, board up your windows, evacuate if you can, do all these things. And then, myself being in kind of a fortified house that's not really under threat. I've got my own generator. I'm kind of all set. And I got to watch all these people who didn't heed the warnings, who refused to listen, who, voted for the guy who wants to nuke hurricanes, all this kind of stuff. It's just a horrible situation. It's like being in a car with a drunk driver. You can't get out of the car. You can't get him to pull over. You're hanging on for life, and you know that you could die too. And that's kind of how I feel, because we're all going to be affected, some more than others. I think we've talked about this before. You and I are fairly well positioned in this situation, but there are people out there right now in food lines, and we feel bad for them. And yet at the same time, we spend all our time trying to talk to people and say, hey, you got to take this more seriously. And this is a little bit off a field from the Trump question that we were just talking about.
Hey, whatever, go for it.
I was reading about this woman who was in the hospital. She's on a ventilator and she's being put in the prone position, which is the last thing they do before you're going to expire. And they set up an iPad so that she could Zoom to either say goodbye to her family or have a holiday chat or whatever. And there were people at that house that she was talking to, gathered in a large group, not wearing masks, and their own mother is in the hospital dying of this disease. And this is kind of what I feel like with the whole situation. And so Trump, him throwing this grenade in, well, it's like, of course he was going to do that. We told you in 2016 that he was going to botch the presidency, that he was going to destroy everything he touched. And he did exactly what we told you he was going to do. And so how can we get upset about this? Now, specifics on this bill. All right. He doesn't care that Americans should get more money. He's not doing this to help people. He's doing this for, Section 230 that he wants changed. He's doing this because he's angry at the American public for rejecting him. There's this is just a complete asshole move. And there's nothing good about it. He doesn't, maybe he's trying to score points somehow, but the effect of this is going to be no checks for Americans.
Exactly. And that's what's so insidious about this, right? This idea that he's like claiming to be doing this for the American people. But we all know that it has nothing to do with the American people, because if it was about the American people, first of all, we would have had these checks how long ago? He would have actually cared about this how long ago, right? Right. The Democrats said $2,000, and then the Republicans said $600. The Democrats said $1,200. The Republicans said $600, and Democrats said, well, because we actually care about people, and we don't want to, we actually don't want to hold a gun to America's heads. Fine, we'll take $600. And those checks are about to go in the mail, and then he suddenly is like, "Oh, by the way, let's go with 2,000 checks." I mean, this is what I like to call it's a flex, right? It's like asserting dominance, right? That he is still somehow relevant.
You realize that he could on Monday decide to go ahead and sign the bill anyway, even after pulling this whole stunt.
I bet you he does. I honestly bet you he does. I bet you he does, because it's just to get attention, to signal to McConnell and to all the and to Pence and all the people out there that he's still significant, that he's still relevant, and it absolutely has nothing to do with empathy for Americans. That is for absolute certain. It has nothing to do with empathy, and that's what's so fucking infuriating about it. The only silver lining out of all of this is that it puts up this sort of interesting political dilemma for McConnell, right? Mm-hmm. And that is the Senate races in Georgia. But I'm just so hesitant to talk about things in terms of political calculus when real human beings are their livelihood is on the beat, right? We're not talking about this from just the perspective of like, oh, well, politically it means this, or politically it means that, and that means it's bad for McConnell. But it's like, yeah, but it's also bad for millions of Americans who literally don't have food.
Because we're watching this hurricane come in and people are going to die. And that's what's going on. Is it we warned, but that doesn't make it any easier to watch.
Exactly.
And I also, there's another interesting narrative that I've heard going on now, which is this whole horseshoe thing, right? Because so here you've got Trump, who's a far right fascist, and people are now making the point that he's agreeing with Bernie Sanders that, you know, Americans should get more money and more relief and things like that. And it's like, how fucking confused can you get,
Unbelievable.
I mean, he is not agreeing with Bernie Sanders.
No.
He doesn't want to give Americans $2,000.
No.
And he might not even, like, the Congress could go through and they could sign, you know, they could pass this bill and Trump could still refuse to sign it. He is just being a petulant child.
That's exactly right. I really appreciate the Democrats sort of calling the bluff, right? And just being like, absolutely, let's go, $2,000. And because they think that, because on the right, they think that we disagree with Trump just because he's Trump or just because he's Republican. No, we disagree with him because his policies are insanely dangerous. If he suddenly started giving away $2,000 to each American, we'll be like, great, absolutely. We're not just here for the tribe, right? We're here because we care.
It's such dirty pool because they had the CARES Act passed in May that hasn't even been given a hearing on the floor of the Senate.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, you know, for 6 months, you know, there has been this, people have been suffering, and we already know that the billionaires have gotten, about $1 trillion richer this year alone.
Infuriating. Fucking infuriating.
Yeah. So that money right there could have gone to be giving. I mean, other countries have been giving people not $1,200 checks or $600 checks, but that much every week.
Yes, I know. They have been paying people to stay home. And there is not that idea just like blows Americans' minds, right? Because we live in this cult of individualism. We live in this cult of the Puritan work ethic, the idea that there is no value to life if you're not toiling as as a slave laborer, right? Essentially, right? And that is a concept that boggles our mind. But this is social democracy, the idea that we should help each other, that the government, it can be a force for good. Look at New Zealand, right? Look at South Korea. Look at Ireland. Look at Ireland, right? Look at the UK. I mean, even the UK is doing this better than us, right? Even the UK, and they're about as close to us as any other country is going to be.
Well, Boris Johnson is often thought of as a kind of a Trump light, but he's actually not. He's actually far to the left of Trump. I mean,
Right.
he's still a social democrat, even though he's a conservative, which is really, really funny. I mean, he supports the public health care. He supports climate change action. And, it's just,
and he's a conservative there, right?
yeah. So this is how warped our politics is. And it becomes a vicious cycle, a self-fulfilling prophecy, because all of these people who are freaking out that they're being made to close their businesses. Well, how much less do you think they'd be freaking out if they were all getting paid?
Exactly. And by the way, people were getting paid so they could go to those businesses, right? So they wouldn't be able to actually go there, but they'd be able to spend their money. A much larger portion of the society would be able to spend money at those places.
That's right. So, and it would also be a situation where businesses are getting loans, consumers are getting money in their pockets. That solves the problem of evictions.
Exactly.
You solve the whole problem. So we've got this situation where we have zero resilience. I want to talk about resilience later, but I want to finish let you finish the news section.
Sure. Let's talk about the pardons briefly, because I just think it's important to hit on how lawless these pardons are. President Donald Trump pardoned more than 24 people, including Paul Manafort, Charles Kushner, the father of his son-in-law, and the latest wave of clemency to benefit long-term associates and supporters. Even members of the president's own party have raised eyebrows about this, saying, Ben Sass of Nebraska saying, this is rotten to the core. Pardons for Matt Manafort and Stone were particularly notable because it underscores the president's desire to chip away at the results of the legacy of the Mueller investigation, Mueller investigation. And I just want to hit on this, Sean, because it really connects back to what we were just talking about, which is this idea that this is not about the American people. This is not, and frankly, I don't even know that it's about Roger Stone or Manafort. It's about undermining the Mueller investigation, which is again about him, right? It's always about him, this narcissism, this complete disregard for the rule of law, right? Other presidents obviously have done pardons, but they're not people, and lots of pardons, but they're not people with whom they have a personal relationship, right? People who have committed, oh my God, crimes, right? Like high profile criminals are being pardoned. And this is just, how far is this on the road to fucking, to kleptocracy and fucking fascism? Well,
there's so much that I could say about this. And one thing is that I don't think a lot of people realize what a horrible character Roger Stone is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. First of all, he looks like the fucking Penguin from Batman.
He does, and he's got Richard Nixon tattooed on his back.
Unbelievable. What kind of person does that? What kind of person?
He was Nixon's speechwriter, and he was instrumental in formulating the initial plan that was hatched in cooperation with Roger Ailes to start an alternative media ecosystem.
Interesting. I did not realize that.
Yeah, what these guys realized is that, Watergate took down President Nixon because there was only CBS, ABC, NBC, and they were all what the right wing would call liberal media. Now, what that really means is fact-based media.
Yeah, straight news.
Accountability media, right? And so they recognized that, just like with minority rule, just understanding what it's going to take to preserve minority rule cannot exist in a framework of accountability. So this has been a project that's been underway since Nixon had to resign because of the news coverage that Watergate got. It put enough pressure on the Congress that Nixon knew that he would not survive an impeachment. So he resigned. And Roger Stone was in the middle of all of that. And Roger Stone was in the middle of the whole Russian election interference. And Roger Stone is a thug that is, he's a consigliere for Trump. And so I don't, and so are all the rest of them.
Yep.
Michael Flynn, the one who wanted to use martial law to overturn the election. These are bad, bad people. And the same thing with Kushner. Chris Christie has been livid about this because he was involved in prosecuting all of that.
Yeah.
And so it's just, I mean, you look at this, it is an utter rogues gallery. And it's as if you took every villain from every film and you changed the script to pardon that person. You know,
it's unbelievable.
Made a joke about the guy who shot Bambi. Let's pardon him. You know, let's pardon, you know, Anthony Hopkins. You know,
exactly.
It's like, you know, come on, pick your worst villain that you can think of, the Joker. Let's pardon him.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Let's pardon these. I mean, it is almost comical. It's like these guys are they're almost like cartoon characters, right? The extent to which they are like I mean, like these criminal ideas. They really are like the Joker. That's why I brought up Penguin, because he really looks like a outward, and these people have lived in this lawless world for so long, right? They lived in this world where they just do what they want. There's no consequences. And I think this is what pisses me off so much about it, is that like they did get nailed by the Mueller investigation, right? And here they are walking away scot-free. And it's always these shitty, powerful people. And by the way, for each one of these individuals that are out here like this, like a Roger Stone, there are hundreds of other white collar criminals that are more or less buying their way out of trouble. You know,
right? Well, and here's a small example. And I follow a congressional candidate from New York. His name is Nate McMurray, and I follow him on Facebook. And he ran a really great campaign. He came within like 0.3% of winning the election, and he was running in a district where there was this guy named Chris Collins. And Chris Collins was indicted for all sorts of things, including insider trading and corruption with campaign finance and all this kind of stuff. He received a Trump pardon. And so this guy who unsuccessfully ran twice to get that seat that Chris Collins had formerly had was running on an anti-corruption platform. And he's running, it's a very Trump heavy district. And he came within like 0.3% of actually winning the district because he went door to door and just covered that county talking about anti-corruption. And he really should have won that election. And the fact that Chris Collins has now received a Trump pardon is just a slap in the face for
it really is.
Everyone who wants to be a real public servant in this country.
Yep.
So I had to throw that in there because it is just, you know, this once again, the pardon power in the Constitution is one of the many absolute powers that the president has been granted. And this just goes to show there were people at the time whether the Constitution was being drafted who objected to this pardon power because it was too much like a monarchy, which is what they all supposedly were trying to prevent. Was America having a monarchy and the peaceful transfer of power? All the things that Trump is attacking are exactly what the framers of the Constitution, their lives were dedicated to preventing this. And there should absolutely fucking be a constitutional amendment to place checks and balances on the president's pardon power, even to the point of that if he pardons criminal activity that can be later shown that he had ties to, that he can be held criminally liable for doing that. Because how else? I mean, it's obscene. This is in a nation of laws to have the president be able to pardon en masse the entire cabal that has brought him to power and kept him in power is insanity.
It's insanity, and we talk about this on the show all the time. Is when power is unaccountable. It is nefarious. This is what happens. Right? Absolute power corrupts absolutely, and this is what we talk about. This is why we need regulations as with teeth, right? With teeth as a bulwark against people that are exactly like Trump that will do this. Right? They will absolutely do this. We cannot, and we talk about this again on the show all the time. We cannot overstate the danger of unaccountable power. Now, I want to round off our news segment with a brief discussion about the bombing I mean, we can't not talk about the fucking bombing, right? I mean, we don't know a lot of details. Everyone who's watching this probably knows about as much as we do. But we were talking about before the show, right, Sean, about what are sort of some of the implications here that we can glean from what we know so far.
Okay, well, it's like every time there is a mass shooting or any sort of a violent incident in the United States at this point, it is directly traceable to the rhetoric and the right-wing media ecosystem. The rhetoric coming from Trump and the rhetoric coming from people like Steve Bannon, Steve Miller, Michael Flynn, Kayleigh McEnany, the entire rogues gallery of right-wing pundits, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Pirro, what's her name?
Limbaugh, Pereiro,
Maria Bartimolo, whatever her name is. There's just a raft of them, and again, this unaccountability produces these people because they can make money as long as they're allowed to do it, and there's people who want to hear what they have to say. They're going to make money, and they. Oh, Alex Jones, is another one who.
Oh my God, absolutely. I mean, he brought like full-on conspiracy theories into the mainstream, right? I mean, he is one of the biggest conduits what we've seen in the last, say, 15 years or 10 to 15 years of really bringing those really you can say whatever you want, right? And so like really you can just come up with whatever you want. And if you say it angry enough and with like enough like bluster, right? There's going to be somebody who pays attention to it.
Well, he rode the wave, and don't forget that his major claim to fame was 9/11 trutherism.
There you go.
That's how it started with him. And I actually know liberals who defended him on free speech grounds and the idea that it was performance art and all this kind of stuff, and then it was, he's brilliant performance artist. No, this is the problem with the attitude that we should just allow anything and everything to be said, and there are going to be consequences. And that is one thing I know for sure. I don't need any fact checking. I don't need anything else like that. But whoever planted that bomb was influenced by the right-wing media ecosystem.
You know it.
And so where this wraps around, though, is, remember, he bombed a communications building. Okay, so this wraps around to left-wing conspiratorial thinking about like 5G. And privacy and surveillance and all this kind of stuff. So there's that whole horseshoe there. And it honestly doesn't matter at this point whether you are far right or far left. Okay, whatever. Well, I think I did the arrows backwards, but you know what I'm saying?
Your point is well taken.
But it doesn't really matter, which extreme you're on. You're plugged into batshit nonsense. You're existing on a steady diet of it, and people change their lives. Remember, this guy who had this RV, it's not cheap to put together explosives. It takes time. There's risk. You could die. Maybe the guy did die. Maybe it was a suicide bombing. We don't know. But whatever it was, we know for sure this person was completely batshit.
Definitely. And there is an entire ecosystem, as you said, I think really astutely, that is making money off of this, right? And you can't talk about this without talking about the confluence of ideology and capitalism and religion, incidentally. But really, right? We talk about religion a lot, and as if it's distinct from conspiracy theory. My argument is that they really are the same thing. The core of it is a willingness to believe, and I'll put this sort of flippantly, but believe whatever the hell you want to believe, right? Like that, it doesn't have to be moored to anything provable. Just because I feel something, right, therefore it must, I believe it.
Myths and storytelling have always been important to every civilization.
Absolutely.
Going all the way back to the even oral traditions before written language was even happened. So storytelling has always been important. And there's lots of great storytelling. We talk about shows, whether it's Star Trek or Star Wars or a lot of these really great shows that people enjoy. They're excellent. Okay. And we need stories. But where the danger comes in is when storytellers recognize that even if they're not great storytellers, they couldn't make a Star Wars, or they couldn't make a Marvel Comics movie, they couldn't make any of these things. they can tell these sordid little tales that they try to pretend are real. And they make a shit ton of money, because if they can get people believing that their stories are not fiction, but they're actually real, that's where all the money is.
Yeah.
Religion is way bigger than the entertainment industry. I mean, it's a part of the entertainment industry, but if you think about it, you think about all the, films, video games, everything else like that, religion is a way bigger business.
Oh my God, are you kidding me? Right, absolutely, a way bigger business.
And same thing with conspiracy theories. I mean, you look at Fox News. Other than they have their hard news division, but their commentariat is what makes most of their money. That's why people keep coming back to them. So you've got they're a multi-billion-dollar a year corporation that subsists on promoting lies.
Absolutely, man.
Intentional lies. So that's where this bombing comes from. Is you're going to get, most people are just going to hear the lies, and it's going to affect their voting, right? And they're going to believe batshit things, but they're not going to do anything. You get this small percentage. All it takes is maybe 0.1% of people who pay attention to that stuff, who become completely batshit and are willing to sacrifice their lives to destroy something. And I think the 5G is part of it. And, we're being worried about collecting, your information being collected. People are starting to think now that any internet company, whether it's Facebook or AT&T or Verizon or Google or anything, it's all part of the same, government corporate information gathering machine. And so it seems to me like this bombing, which, it was a substantial bombing. I mean, it's not the size of Oklahoma City, but it was maybe a quarter the size of the Oklahoma City bomb. We haven't got any figures yet as to, the power of that bomb, but it certainly destroyed a large section of downtown and broke windows for miles. So,
yeah, it's really strange, right? I mean, we'll see what happens as it unfolds, but the idea that the goal was explicitly not to injure people, it seems, right, but to injure infrastructure, attack infrastructure of some kind, I think is really interesting, and it really makes me feel. And I mean, my initial reaction to this was like, oh, wow, obviously a right wing thing, right? Because most of these things are right wing sort of, terrorist type things, from Dylan Roof to et cetera, right? These people who are radicalized online, and then they go out and they do these fucking, or just listening to conspiracy theory, whatever. But then the interesting idea of the data collection element that you mentioned, and the fact that it's about the sort of that makes it feel kind of left wing in a lot of ways, right? That sort of, but again, it's a horseshoe, not and I think that's an important thing for our listeners and for everyone to understand, right? Is that like you get back to the same point of paranoia, of believing things that you just want to believe, or sort of a cult sort of mindset that is like a closed information ecosystem where that's self-reinforcing, and that's always the outcome.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this guy, or it's probably, could be a woman, but
it could be. Come on,
99% likely to have been a guy. Okay,
definitely, I'm sure it was.
So this guy was somewhat ethical. They at least they view themselves ethically, in the sense that they took the trouble to put a computerized warning device with a countdown to try to get people away from there. And I think only 3 people were. Did they say 3 people were killed or
injured? No one was killed. No one killed so far. No, except for there's some human. There's some remains, something like in the bomb, in the wreckage of the bomb itself. But no one was actually killed. There was some injuries, but not even serious injuries. It was almost like they went out of their way to not injure people. It was also in the middle, and very early in the morning on Christmas.
So they went out of their way to make a statement without loss of life. So you have to contrast that with a mass shooter. Exactly. You have to contrast that with a suicide bomber. So this ideology of this person, the psychology of this person, is someone who is not ethical, but who considers themselves to be ethical.
Right. That's very interesting. Very, very interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. It's great insight. So let's move on to our little retrospective here. We want to talk about sort of where we've been, what happened, and where we are now. So let's get a little bit like sort of sentimental here, Sean, and just reflect on where we've been as a show. Like I said, it's our last show of the season or of the year. And I don't know, I'm kind of getting a little misty-eyed, Sean. I said Tim because Tim is such a big part of this. So from your perspective, man, what was our origin story?
Well, honestly, this came out of, I mean, it has a long backstory as far as I'm concerned, but I think for the two of us, it came out of just sort of our attempts to make sense of the pandemic. We were both had extra time on our hands. We're both home because of the situation of COVID. I mean, it affected my business in a huge way, and negatively, of course. And so we had the time to start talking about these things. And I think you and I were just really just kind of commiserating and just having private phone calls. And then we started talking on Zoom, and we're kind of like, well, hey, why don't we post these chats that we're having, because we're talking about things that maybe some other people might want to hear. And this goes back, by the way, because I previously had a show in 2012, 2013, and it was called National Progressive Talk Radio. And I did a live show at that point where it was an audio only podcast. I had always wanted to do a video series, but it was just sort of not, it was enough for me to be able to just handle that on my own as a sole practitioner trying to do a show, to do audio only. So I did it through Blog Talk Radio, where I could just talk on the phone. And then I finally hooked up this microphone to a phone hybrid so that I could use this to talk to my guests. And we had call-ins, and it was good. I mean, I did it for like a year and a half. I think I did 50 some odd shows, and it was focused mainly on books and authors. I talked to a lot of famous authors, by the way, during that one, and it was enjoyable, but it was just ultimately unsustainable because of the time commitment that was involved. And I got to go back even further to when I started Black Sun Journal in 2001. And
that was super influential for me, by the way, Black Sun Journal, right? Because I remember in my era of trying to come to terms with, I was leaving religion and leaving the cult mindset, and coming into my own politically, right, as a college student and as a young adult. And so that blog was really influential. I don't think I've ever told you that, but it was.
Oh, well, thank you. It was, I mean, this was my intent, right? Was to sort of talk about my psychological journey out of my cult, and it was very personal. But then I also started making it more about atheism and secularism, and it was something that it sent me down a lot of different philosophical alleys, from evolutionary psychology to to really sort of engaging with the arguments, engaging with Christian apologetics and understanding how that all worked, being able to refute those arguments, because they're very good at it. I mean, they fool a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they really are, right? They have, we talk on this show a lot of the right co-opting the strategies of the left, right? And this is definitely one of them, right? They have gotten it into a very I can't tell you how many people have reached out to me on Facebook, people that I grew up with or whatever, that are religious, and said, like, you got to look at this guy. He's going to convince you that I feel really bad for you that don't believe in God, and so here is how I'm going to sort of like help you enrich your life and then these arguments are always these sort of these are the arguments that we're talking about here.
It's truly amazing how widespread this idea is that atheists are to be pitied. We're to be pitied. Really, we're to be prayed for. We'll pray for you. I'm so sorry that, and then the other angle I get a lot is that I'm so sorry that your cult ruined you for believing in God, kind of thing.
Yeah, right. And that's really underhanded, right?
So
underhanded. That is lame, because you're like, look, that is you can't come at it full on. So what you're going to do is like sort of reach into my past and assign some sort of sense of like trauma to me, and sort of try to undermine my argument. That's fucked up. That's wrong.
for so many people, it's so foreign to them. The idea that you could not believe in a higher power and you could be okay as that you could live an ethical life. It's just so foreign to them. They can't wrap their heads around it in any way. So, that was that. And blogging in those days was a lot more like Facebooking is now, in the sense that I had this, I had this commenting system that was called Intense Debate, and you would end up, you could block people. It was, and so there was a lot of discussions. There would be hundreds of comments sometimes on my articles going back and forth, where I would dialogue this stuff out with people. And I met a lot of friends through that, such as you. I mean, even though we kind of, I knew of you, but I really the blog was like my real sort of magnet for talking to like-minded people. And so I've really always wanted to weave in the atheism and secularism piece with the politics. And so I think we've actually accomplished that in this show. And that's why I'm really happy about it. And I'm really excited about continuing this, because my focus really changed over the years from, a real desire to engage with atheism and those arguments, which now I consider to be kind of old hat. Now I'm concerned about social and racial justice and calling out the unjust hierarchies, because that is really where you go. Once you move away from religion and God as a source of morality, you start looking at just the world, and how do I show up in this world, and how do I address the things that I'm seeing, the injustices that I'm seeing. And so when we started talking, I realized that this was that, and I needed a partner for the project. Couldn't do it on my own. I didn't want to do it on my own. And you, Christophe, ended up being the perfect partner, because you're an attorney, you're well-read, you're a secularist, atheist, you have a commitment to reason, you have expertise, you respect expertise, you care about fairness, and this has been an uncommon synergy, and it's enriched my life incredibly to be able to do this, and just let alone to do a show, just to have that connection on a weekly basis is really important to me. And so even if nobody was watching, it would still be important.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's so funny, right? Because we hang up the phone at the end, and we're always like, at the end of every week, and we're like, man, like, that was just so much fun. And like, I'm like, always like, man, I appreciate you, man. Like, because like, it's, and Lindsay and I were taking a walk. We take a lot of walks. Everybody takes a lot of walks these days. I never realized how much I enjoyed walking. And we talk, I like usually, so I'll usually like smoke beforehand, like weed, so I'll be like kind of like a little bit high, and then we'll be walking around. I'll just be like gabbing away. And Lindsay is sort of an introvert, so like, and I always joke, I'm always like, are you like upset because I just like talk for like a half hour straight as we're walking? And she's like, no, because, and I'm like, well, I guess not, because if that was a problem for you, you probably wouldn't have married me, because I've been doing this for a long time. I've always done this. So obviously you're okay with it, or else we wouldn't have gotten past like date 4, but yeah, man. I look back, and it was this time last year, I guess in January, February last year, I launched a blog, and I missed the blog boat in a lot of ways, right? Because the early 2000s really was the blog boat. I almost wish I was around then, right? Because now Facebook is more like that sort of, like you said, that sort of style of quick day-to-day blog posts with comments and interactions in those comments and stuff, which I really enjoy. But just like you, I enjoy Facebook, and I enjoy talking to people, and I met a lot of great folks that way. But I wanted to be doing something more, right? And having been an atheist for a while, like you said, I was like, well, how do I? It's not just enough to be an atheist, right? Like, I mean, it's how do I? Even just if it's just my little drop in the bucket, how do I do that drop in the bucket, right? In terms of moving society to a better place, even if it's just impacting the people that are in my immediate orbit, right? And so, and the main thing was like what I came down to was this idea of, and I was talking to Lindsay about this yesterday, actually, this idea that like, if you want to change society, we have to find a way to allow people to work together, right?
Yeah.
We cannot solve society's big problems unless we work together. And we cannot work together as individuals or as nation states if we are not willing to be introspective and look at ourselves and say, maybe I could have done that better. And maybe this person isn't out to get me. Maybe we really can work together. And so I think that you really have to get that down to the individual level, the individual being able to, and you and I talk about this all the time. And this is why I think we connect so well, is because we are both people who are willing to be introspective, to look at ourselves and say, man, why do I believe that? Why am I doing X, Y, and Z? And I think once you scale that up to the nation state, right, then nation states can work together and get things done. And so, and then as I was trying to do this, you and I started talking, like you said, in this Zoom environment, and then we got Tim involved, our great friend Tim, who does all of the as we talk about all the time, all the imagery, all the artwork, everything, and it's really come together into this sort of synergy where I kind of feel like we are the two of us are able to really connect, but we are whatever project I was trying to do on my own in February has been amplified and improved through connection with you and the Radical Secular and this show. And not to mention the guests and like you said, just the weekly catharsis of just having a conversation with somebody who fucking gets it, who really fucking gets it, because it's so rare.
Well, that's it, because you could go insane in this world.
Yes, exactly.
And there's just so much of what's going on is introspection is rejected. And I just want to touch on one more thing with Black Sun Journal. The name actually is referring to the Jungian shadow side of existence and that which is repressed, that which is not looked at. And so the idea is, let's shine a light on all of these areas that people don't want to look at. And so that's what the Black Sun is supposed to be. Unfortunately, Black Sun has a connotation and sort of occult, even Nazi symbolism, because the Nazis co-opted a lot of that kind of imagery.
That's true. And
so I had to kind of fight against that a little bit. It wasn't too bad because people understood. I had it right in the about section. This is what I'm about. I'm not about, not about this occult bullshit.
Right.
And so it was very clear there, but it is something that scares people. The idea of the Black Sun scares people for some reason, because I think most people don't really want to look into themselves. And because what they see when they look into themselves is that they're equal parts dark as light. They see their mortality. They see all of these things that people that scare them. And so we see our society has just, in addition to entertainment, there's sports, there's every other kind of possible diversion that you can get into to avoid looking into yourself.
Having children.
Yeah, having children.
They're pretty much anything can be that kind of distraction, but I absolutely agree. And this was the crux of what I was trying to do early on, was this idea of looking at things like our cognitive biases, right? Because I thought that could be a way in, because if we could all agree that we have cognitive biases, then we must agree that that we are sometimes wrong.
Yeah,
we have to agree. And if we're sometimes wrong, but like you said, people don't want to look at that, right?
No,
that's the last thing people want to do.
Cognitive biases, critical thinking, fact checking are something that you think would have universal appeal, but they don't, because they are a threat. Everyone sees these things as a threat, because it's like we talked about last week on the opinion card. Objective truth is not something that can be hijacked for someone's personal agenda. And we all have agendas. And I'm not saying that nobody should have agendas, but you should be willing to look at your agenda and honestly evaluate what you're doing, what you're saying, and how well you know yourself. And I think that this is the key. part to this. And so where there was one thing that happened, the rift in the atheist movement that happened in around 2011. And that sort of catalyzed my show. And it also catalyzed me moving away from the blogging, because the blogging was really associated more with atheism. And what happened is Elevator Gate. And just really briefly, there was an atheist conference where there was a woman who was in an elevator, and someone came into the elevator and asked that woman if she wanted to come to their room to have coffee. And it was the middle of the night. It was like really late at one of these conferences where everybody's like up all hours of the night. And so it turned into a blog post by that woman saying, hey, like, don't do that. Don't accost a woman in the elevator late at night and invite her to your room for coffee. And so it seemed like it was a very kind of innocent misunderstanding thing, but it catalyzed this giant response where you had a lot of men saying, well, fuck you if you don't just say no. Like, who cares? Like, I'll ask a woman for coffee if I feel like it. And then and then women were going, no, you don't understand. We don't feel safe being in an elevator. We don't feel safe. And so it catalyzed really the early beginnings of this recent social justice conversation about sexism and about Me Too and about harassment and all those things. Because what happened is that they started drawing up policies for these atheist conferences, and a lot of people didn't like the policies, so people stopped going to the atheist conferences. And I initially, when this all happened, I thought it was ridiculous, and I was not on board with it. And there was a whole group of atheists who formed a group called Atheism Plus, which is actually, ironically, essentially exactly what we are on this show, which is atheism plus social justice. And that catalyzed a huge reaction in the atheist movement against that by all of the men's rights people and the libertarians and they just wanted to be atheists, and they didn't want to have to think about social justice. And by the way, the atheist movement in the first place was mostly guys at the time. That it was like 20% women maybe. And so a lot of the big people who were big in the movement were kind of saying, hey, we really ought to actually try to be friendlier to women. And then you have these other people saying, no, we just want to remain this libertarian boys club and not have to think about social justice. So that rift right there led me to back away from the sort of atheist movement and start my National Progressive Talk Radio show.
Oh,
and
interesting.
Ironically, the first person I had as a guest on that show was the head of the National Atheist Party, which was a very small political party, which was actually trying to start to get candidates on the ballot as a member of the Atheist Party. So it all comes full circle. And I think that this is really, this is 20 years later after I started it. And here we are going into 2021. And I couldn't be happier to be involved in this project.
Hell yeah, man. And that's a really interesting sort of trajectory. And that's exactly why I wanted to ask this question, because I wanted everyone to understand where we are coming from on this, right? Like, what is our origin story? Why are we doing this, right? We've talked about it from different perspectives, right? We've talked about it from the perspective of what radical secularism means, right? But I think it's interesting to think about from this perspective of like, what was the steps that drew us together, and why we're willing to do this, and not even just willing, but we love doing this every week, right? Because it's important to us, right? It's like I was saying, like, we were like, sometimes I think like, what would I be doing if I wasn't doing this? I'd be like, and remember we talked about this we were chatting, and we were like, what if we weren't doing this every Saturday? I'd be sitting around on Saturday wondering why I'm not doing more to advance the things that I care about, right? So it's like, this is the kind of stuff that gets me out of bed every morning. I want to talk about, like, again, the show's development. Like, what do you think was the biggest sort of turning point? We were like 6 episodes in, and but we've developed a lot. I feel we've changed a lot since that first episode, right?
Well, yeah. Doing it this way is much different than my old show. We had the opportunity with this to develop a larger brand, and I feel like, Black Sun Journal was a brand, National Progressive Talk Radio was a brand, but this is specific, and this is probably the best branding effort I've been involved in. And that thanks to Tim. He really hit the nail on the head with this, with our logo and branding. It couldn't be more evocative of what we stand for, and it handles the politics. There's the negation of the X. There's it is really, and it's American. It's unmistakably American as a kind of an interpretation of the American flag, potentially without the religion.
Yeah.
and so that branding is really key to this, and it wasn't obvious when we started this. I mean, I
no,
think
it wasn't.
You remember when we were looking at all the proposals that he had for logos and things like that, and
wide range.
We couldn't have picked a better one.
Yeah.
I think after, looking back on it, I think we didn't know. It was like, how did we come to that choice when we finally picked the final logo? Right?
I don't even remember how it was. I mean, we were sitting here and we went through different logos and it was trying to find this balance, but I don't remember what it was and exactly what it was, because Tim came up with a bunch of different ideas. He went back to the drawing board a couple times and came back with something that was radically different, like from where we started. And I don't know. I kind of feel like when you and I saw this one, we were just like, yeah, I don't know what it was. It was just like a gut instinct.
It really hits all the notes. And, the podcast market is terribly saturated. I mean,
oh yeah,
we're not the only ones sitting at home trying to figure out what to do about the world.
Yeah. Turns out. Yeah.
But, it's something that I think we felt that we had something unique to contribute that was beyond just riffing and rambling. And we've been able to, aside from developing our own presentation skills, which I think has really been important for me, because I started out and it's not like right now, people can't probably tell, but I'm reading off of a script and so is Christophe. And we figured out how to do that without looking like we're reading off a script. Right. And so we put time and thought into our podcast. And I think that is why we are going to ultimately gain more listeners and a following, because it's kind of like if you build it, they will come in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I really feel you on the presentation skills. I wanted to talk a little bit also about what my favorite episode was. And in that time, I looked back at the first episode we did, and I just, learning how to speak to the camera, learning how to read a script while looking through a camera, kind of, all of these things really take skill. And I think that you and I naturally are probably pretty decent talkers and speakers, but still it's not intuitive necessarily, to convert that into a workable show. It really is a skill. And I think also, we've done a really great job, but I think we've improved the sort of structure of the show. I think we went through various different ideas and so I don't know, it's really, it's a lot of fun. It's really challenging. It's been a real ride, and it's crazy because we've only been doing this for whatever, like 8 months,
6 months.
That's 6 months, and and we've come a long way. I'm a little misty-eyed here.
Well, when you look at our first episode, which is still up, we're not embarrassed about that first episode, because I think that episode actually encapsulates everything that we are trying to accomplish in this show, and we just kind of came at it off the cuff with no preparation, and we're just talking, and we kind of laid it out. I've gone back and listened to it a couple times. In the first 20 minutes of that episode, you get a sense for what this entire series is, and so I'm proud of that. And of course, it's just on a laptop camera, an old laptop, Mac laptop camera, and it looked terrible and sounded terrible because it didn't even have a microphone.
No mic, no lights, it was just like you, me, and 2 laptops. That was it. That was it,
So learning how to be a on-camera host, I was always behind the camera. I've been at television my whole life, but I've always been as an editor or a colorist or doing sound recording, mixing, things like that behind the scenes, and never actually presented on camera except for back in the day when I was in the cult and I did some speeches and gave some sermons as a minister, but it was not like this. It was not where we had to sustain on a given topic and have conversation that held together and flowed from one subject to the next. We try to inject humor into what we're doing and have fun with it. And that's not something that is automatic, let me tell you.
No, it really isn't. And one of the challenges for me, right? So in law school, I did trial practice, right? You have to do you have to like mock arguments and stuff. And so there was some, and also interestingly, one of the biggest places where I got a sense of how this works is when I was in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so you do a lot of speaking engagements and you share in front of people, right? So you get some skills there, but one thing I've always had concerns about is I tend to talk really fast, right? And the eye contact with the camera, like I'm talking right into the camera right now as if I'm talking to you. In fact, I can't even see you right now. I can only see the camera.
Well, that's the funny part about it is, like, we like right now I'm looking straight in the camera, but you're down here. And
exactly.
So I had to get like if I was just looking at you like I was talking to you, I'd be doing like this.
Yeah,
right?
Same thing. Me, I'd be like talking like this the entire time.
And so we can't do that. And so it's this funny thing, and you start to realize that presenters who are on camera, whether it's at CNN or whatever, they do this all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're just looking at the camera, they're reading their script off the prompter and things like that. And it's we don't have prompters, by the way. We just use monitors, but it works out all right. And it's definitely something that we've had to grow into.
Yeah, absolutely. I was trying to think about, I think there was this moment when we got on Apple Podcasts for me and that was really early on, but still there was this moment when all of a sudden like, oh shit, like Apple Podcasts, like, I mean, the barrier for entry is low to get on that, but still there was something that felt very like, holy shit, like we've got a real fucking podcast here, right? Someone could theoretically look for atheist podcasts, secular podcasts, whatever, news podcasts, and potentially stumble upon or radical politics, right? And stumble upon us. And like that was something that was, I don't know, like I kind of felt like I keep talking about how, you and I have been writing online, talking to people. And I think I like to think influencing at least some people. I know you do, but I like to think that we have influenced some people. But I'd like to say that that felt like private, where this feels like we really are committing ourselves to it, right? Like I can always stop writing Facebook posts for a month if I want, but I'm not going to stop doing this show. I show up every week for this show, right? And I start thinking about the next episode as soon as the show ends, right?
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? Because like you have to start like we have 3 shows already on the horizon, right? We already know what we're going to do 3 weeks out. So and there's something about that makes it so meaningful and feel like we're doing something here, right? And I always have wrestled with whether or not I'd like to get involved in politics, like run for office, or in fact, that's why I originally went to law school, right? I didn't necessarily want to practice law. I just wanted to get involved in politics. And I figured the best way to do that is to become a lawyer. And turns out I like practicing law also, and I like law also, but really it was always about politics for me. And so I wonder what that might look like down the road. But this has been for me like really great starting point and to really express myself in a way that feels official. And that's what, again, the Apple podcast things felt like a really important moment for me for that reason.
And that's true. And it's really good. And I remember back when I was doing NPTR in 2012 and 2013, and people were saying to me, like, why don't you get on Apple Podcasts? Why don't you get on YouTube? And I didn't. I was on this narrow platform, which was called Blog Talk Radio. And the reason I was on that is because I wanted it to be a live show. I wanted to take calls. But as it turned out, we didn't always get a lot of calls. We got some calls, and that was always really fun to do. But it's radio is an old format. Podcasting is much better because it allows people to take it offline. They can take it in small doses. They can listen in the car, all those kind of things at their convenience. And I think I really missed the boat there. And I'm happy that we're doing it right this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of which, so what do you have a favorite episode so far from us? Because we can throw people back and be like, if you're listening to this, go listen to this episode,
I was thinking about this question because I saw it on the script, and it's just very difficult for me to pick a favorite episode. I especially really appreciate all the contributions from our guests. Each and every one of our guests has given us a huge vote of confidence to come on our show and to lend us their voice and their persona and credibility. I mean, that's a big deal. Big deal. I just want to say to all of our guests, we really appreciate it. And that's, I think, the most gratifying thing is to be part of a larger conversation. And when we get people who are either experts in their field or have something to contribute, it really changes up the dynamic between the two of us. On the other hand, I really like it when we get the chance for the two of us to go in depth on a subject. I particularly liked our segment on Star Trek, where we in the Better Angels show.
That was a lot of fun.
And I liked our episode we did, the one where we really went in depth on libertarianism, conscience voting. I think my personal hosting best was the opinion card, which is last week.
You were outstanding. You were outstanding, and that was such an important episode. I think it's one of those foundational episodes for what we're talking about here on the Radical Secular.
Totally. I mean, it really comes down to that, and that is what it's the gateway. Opinions are the gateway drug for religion, for conspiracies, for pseudoscience, for radical destructive politics. The conspiracies like white genocide and this crap. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. What people allow themselves to get into when they start getting caught up in their own opinions, and so it's the core of the show.
Yeah. And you know what? I just think about this now, and riffing off each other is also sort of the core of the show, right? Like, you say something and it's like, bing, and I have an idea, but and just sort of looping this back to the idea of the introspection problem, right? Because when we talk about the opinion card, we talk about this idea that we all just like this sort of post-truth sort of environment, that quote unquote, it's all about that lack of introspection, right? Because if anyone who's looking at themselves seriously and questioning why they believe what they believe, and even the concept of let alone being honest about those introspections, but just the concept that introspection is valuable in the first place, right? If you're doing that, you will debunk your own conspiracy theories, right? You can't be serious about introspection and also believe in a conspiracy theory.
Right. Well, opinions are self-indulgent. And all delusions begin with self-delusion. And all lies begin with lying to yourself. So it comes down to the core of the essence of the Trump era is this opinionated populism, which is a straight ticket to fascism. And
for sure,
their whole ethic is let's do the wrong thing and laugh about it and laugh at liberals who are pissed off about it.
That's the whole fucking thing. It's the whole thing. It's cruelty.
There's nothing else to it.
It's cruelty. It's callousness. And it is this brazen idea that I get to believe whatever I want to believe. And it's really gratifying then all that to see it run into reality, for example, but it's only momentary gratification, right? Because I see these people who are saying, on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, they're like, back they said, Trump was going to win. Trump loses. They're like, he hasn't actually lost. You have to wait until the electors vote. And the electors vote. Oh no, you have to wait. Don't wait on January 6th. You'll see. And every single time they get to this place where their conspiracy theory, their idea has been debunked, but and so it's very gratifying to see their brazen unwillingness to accept reality sort of run into actual reality. And that was the one element that's been nice. That's been positive about the coronavirus, right? As awful as it's been, like the MAGA movement ran head on into reality there. And that was the only thing that could just derail that train, is hard, unspinnable reality. But of course, they always forget, right? They always immediately forget that their last idea was debunked, right? So the person who's now saying January 6th, don't worry, forgets that they were swearing up and down that when the electors came, it was going to be different, right? And it's just sort of this so it's again satisfying to see these bad ideas run into reality, but it's also infuriating because you know that they will just move the goalposts again. That's it. They'll move the goalposts again.
It's like the Jim Carrey character in The Mask and his famous line, and that is, "Somebody stop me." And that is the entire Trump movement. Trump himself from the very beginning is like, fuck your feelings. Fuck you if you don't like it. I'm doing it. And that is the entire movement. And it's a series of fallback positions, like a line of fucking dominoes. Yeah. And as one falls, the next one falls, and they just move the goalposts just to follow those dominoes all the way on down the line. And they're going to keep doing it.
They'll keep doing it until the United States literally has completely fallen apart, right? I mean, I was talking to Lindsay about this yesterday. People think that, for example, climate change is about the climate, which it is, obviously, but it also destabilizes governments, right? Because then when a government, for example, cannot provide food, let's say, right, because of desertification, that's a hard word for me to say, and then what happens is, right, you have unhappy citizens. The democracies destabilize. Then you get first of all, you get climate refugees, but so within the home country, you get a destabilization, you get unhappy people, and then you get a strong man that comes in, right? Well, and this is classic. And then, by the way, all those climate refugees go to Western democracies, and then the nativism kicks in the Western democracies, and that's what we're living with right now.
This is the story of the last decade, okay? Yep. In sometime, I think it was in 2011 or 2012, I believe 2011, the Arab Spring.
Yes, exactly.
And there's a show that was on, I believe it's a Showtime documentary series, and one of the correspondents on that show was Thomas Friedman, who's the New York Times columnist. And he goes and actually documents how this took place in Syria. The reason why Syria had its civil war was because the farmers were running out of water. They couldn't grow crops anymore. So they had to all come into the cities, and there wasn't enough food. And that was the first climate war. And
classic. It's classic. I mean, this is where we're going to see this happen over and over and over again.
It destabilized the entire Middle East. It created the refugee problem, which has led to the rise of fascist governments in Europe and, Brexit and everything else. It is a domino. That's the other domino effect are the real dominoes that are falling. And this is a known problem with systems where once systems start to break down, as if you're taking that as feedback and you're going, wow, our system is breaking down, let's fix it, then great. But that's not what happens in democracies, and especially when you have something like the fossil industry, as powerful as the fossil industry, pointing the finger away from that towards something else. So instead of looking at the destabilization of climate from fossil fuels, they're looking at refugees. They point the finger at refugees.
Right? And then you can feed on xenophobia, et cetera, and then you can, by the way, you can get votes for that the exact factor that is destabilizing democracies and causing these problems. The people will vote to continue those exact policies because of the xenophobia, because of the racism, because of and it's what a cycle.
And it's brilliant for the oil industry.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
When people are, when things are working well in society, then you can afford to spend extra money on transitioning to, say, electric vehicles. But when people are broke, they're going to drive that gas car until it breaks, and then they're going to drive it more, and they're going to fix it, and they're not going to buy new vehicles, and you're not going to get the uptake that you need to get rid of fossil fuels because people are desperate. And what do you do when you're desperate? You turn to the old standby, what's worked for 100 years. Just put more gas in the car.
Exactly. And by the way, you look for a strong man to break through the gridlock of democracy, right? Someone who's just going to take bold action. I mean, that kind of populism is precisely what brings people like Trump to power. I mean, it's precisely what happens, and it's happened all over the world.
Yeah, and if we can't fix America to the point where we can start helping people, we're going to. I mean, we're going to lose seats in 2022, and we're going to elect a fascist in 2024. It's a guarantee.
Yep, absolutely. And speaking of which, let's talk about the insane events of 2020, right? Because we're talking about insane events of insane events of the last decade. You and I were on the phone when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed. And like, it's weird to think that happened this year because we know the result, right? Because of Amy Coney Barrett and all that, but the actual significance of that. I mean, I remember we were on the phone and I don't know, like, do you remember how you felt about that?
Yeah, it was very traumatic. It was pure terror, really. Yeah. As when I heard that, because this was the thing that we had all feared during the Trump era.
Yes.
We had feared. It was like, okay, we kind of took these body blows. It's like, okay, Gorsuch, it's like Kavanaugh, but we're thinking to ourselves, okay, but we can turn this around because as long as there's only two, then it's a 5-4 court, and we can, Biden can get in or a Democrat can get in, and we can turn it around. But when that third body blow happened, and particularly who it was, she was not just any justice. She is possibly you know the law, so you probably know more about Supreme Court justices, but I would say that she is definitely in the top 5, if not the top 3 justices appointed in the 20th century.
Oh, yes, definitely. Not even a question. I would go even broader than that. I mean, there have been some amazing courts, the Brandeis Court, right? There has been some really amazing justices, but Ginsburg, and particularly the era in which she was on the court. That's what's so important, right? Because she was on to the most conservative era in a very long time, and it's only getting more conservative. The court has been the Rehnquist court, then it was the Roberts court. It's never been a liberals court, right? Since in a long time. So
Earl Warren, or was Earl Warren the last?
Earl
liberal?
Warren might be the last liberal. Yes, exactly. There's another great justice, right? Another great justice of lore. But I think in terms of the liberal justices on the court, I don't think you can get more of a powerhouse. And that's even setting aside the fact that she's a woman, and she was the intellectual sort of structure of the liberal side of that court for a generation, and so even if even if the court were split, continued to be split in an equitable way, her loss would have been devastating, right? So even if she died during Biden's term, her loss would have been devastating. Of course, way less devastating, but it would have been in terms of the law, but it would have been devastating because of her intellectual. She was an intellectual powerhouse.
Yeah. So that was it was a national tragedy, and I think even beyond a presidency. I mean, when her because her tenure as a justice lasted 25, 30 years, maybe more. Really long. It was a long time. So it was like the end of an era. Exactly. I feel like I have another reason for wearing my Wonder Woman shirt today, because there is a real live Wonder Woman, right? And I like to tell the story. Obviously, she was a real friend of Georgetown, and I've said that before. Where I went to law school, she would come on campus a lot, and you would see her walking around. She was a very tiny woman with her, and she had her Secret Service person there with her who was like tower over her, but she had this like huge personality. But I think the most interesting thing is that what I always say is that her, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, her husband also, Marty Ginsburg, taught at Georgetown. He taught tax. I don't know if he still does, but he would always start out by saying, I don't know if you know my wife, she's kind of a big deal, and that was like the joke, starting out the semester or whatever. And, but the biggest thing was that he had a debilitating illness while he was in law school. And so Ruth Bader Ginsburg went not only to her classes, she went to his classes and took notes. So she went to two people's classes, during law school, which is a lot. For sure. So she, again, really, truly a Wonder Woman. Yeah. So that's probably one of the saddest things that happened in 2020.
Yes. Yeah, it really was. And just wow, 2020. I mean, I had a whole post about this on Facebook about how like, oh, like hashtag 2020 and like da da da, and like, and I think it's fucking lame, but still, and we can talk a lot. We could talk about the fallacy of New Year's resolutions as well. But still, 2020 really, right? 2020 really was a remarkable year. I mean, let's not forget, right, that like there was given all that's happened and it's easy to forget that there was a full-on civil rights era style racial reckoning over the summer, so on reflection, Sean, like, how well do you think America has responded to that? I think that's a kind of a hard question. What do you think about it?
Well, there's a lot of talk about the economy and about, V-shaped recovery, U-shaped recovery, K-shaped recovery.
K-shaped recovery. I think it's a brand new idea.
Which I think we need to explain it a little bit. And what that means is that you've got a part of the economy, which is the stock market going up like this. And you've got another part of the economy, which is people's livelihoods and jobs and their financial security going like this. So making the form of a K, right? So I think that with racial awakening, we have a similar situation where it's K-shaped. We've got a lot more white people who are on board, and this civil rights awareness and the idea of shifting the job description of police and transferring some money into social services, which, is defund the police, which I don't give a fuck if Obama doesn't like it. That's a great fucking slogan and we need to use it.
100%. 100%. I think Obama is wrong on that.
Yeah. Yeah. But so many more white people have actually gotten on board with that and understanding the issues. Okay. But on the other hand, the right-wing media is in the sewer. They're headed straight for the sewer, and they're much better prepared to resist this civil rights awakening than they ever have been before. And they've got their talking points lined up, right? They've completely pivoted to this basically white genocide narrative that somehow whites are under threat and that, blacks need to be put back in their place and that, BLM is violent and they're thugs and, Antifa and all this kind of stuff. So whenever something goes wrong, whenever a black man, it happened again just a week ago, guys, like he's going into his house with a sandwich and he gets shot in the back by a cop. It's just, so the just raw injustice of that is swept under the rug by these other narratives. And
it's staggering.
So they immediately just crank this outrage machine into high gear, lest anyone start to care, right? We can't have people caring about these police murders because if you actually faced what was going on, you'd have to do something about it. And conservatives are just perennially allergic to change. And so they've just put up this just epic cloud of bafflegab and nonsense, which has created this where among certain circles, racial awareness has gone down to the point where there's actually resentment at even having to address the issue, which has been which you see in the reaction to athletes taking a knee. And so you've got corporations who are, Sports Illustrated put the socially conscious athlete as their athlete of the year on their cover. And so that is all this positive news, and yet all this reactionary crap happening has turned the racial awakening of 2020 into this K-shaped thing, just like the economy. And guess what else is in common? The race and the economy are intertwined. So
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I really like the K-shaped analogy, the K-shaped recovery analogy, because I really do see that in terms of this racial, so racial reckoning. I have been really heartened in a lot of ways, disappointed, right? I think that there are some, what I like to think of like fair weather liberals, right? People who showed up, and I know some of them, right? People who have done precisely nothing to change anything, right? They're on board. They're on board. And I think there's something valuable to that. But but I'm not talking about folks like you, obviously, or like Jillian, or like my wife, right? I'm talking about like, you guys were always on board with this, right? And frankly, the way you all live your lives doesn't mean that you have to, or your perspectives on these and the way you live your life doesn't imply that you have to change anything in terms of racial as a result of this racial awakening. But that's what annoys me, right? Is that there's so many folks out there, white folks, well-meaning white folks who they're like, oh yeah, I'm on board with civil rights, and maybe I posted the Black Tuesday blackout thing or whatever, and I showed up to a rally, but other than that, I've really not taken any affirmative steps to learn to understand the issue better, right? Let alone actually do something to change my life or confront my racist family members or any of that kind of stuff, right? And that is really infuriating to me, because it's like, what was the fucking point? Now, on the other hand, and this is a weird thing for me to say, but like, this sort of corporate initiatives have been frankly outstanding. I mean, outstanding. I mean, this is not what I would normally say about a corporation. I do say this about corporations all the time, is they are rational actors. They are like the economic actor that, economists use as a rational, but like corporations really are that, right? They respond directly to incentives purely rationally. And so they see the shift in the marketplace and they have responded, but it's not just the marketplace, right? It's the corporate culture. I had to take hours worth of like sensitivity training and all this kind of stuff at my company. Like, there is something to be said for that, right? There has been a slate of new prosecutors elected nationwide that are like, progressive, that understand policing, that are about civilian control over police. And I think also mainstream Democrats are on board with Black Lives Matter. It's not just the lefties, right? It's the Nancy Pelosi's, it's the Hillary Clintons, it's the mainstream powerful Democrats that are now on board, right? The Democratic machine is on board with Black Lives Matter. That is a huge step forward.
Well, okay, so in fact, as a nation right now, we are in the middle of an official policy of genocide toward Black, brown, and poor people. And I say that it sounds extreme, but the fact is that if you're Black, brown, or poor, you are about 3 times as likely to die of COVID. It started out being like twice as likely. Now it's up to 3 times, because
insane.
Guess who the essential workers are mostly, who are bringing your packages, who are making food, who are picking food, who are working in Amazon warehouses and all of these things. It's a lot of people who they're not professionals. They're just workers. They're just bodies. And those people are being forced to put themselves at risk, and they're not being compensated. Companies are not being forced to protect them sufficiently. And so this is the real story. George Floyd was one man who tragically died. But in that, the video of that killing was a metaphor for the knee of big money that is on the necks of, tens or hundreds of thousands of Black and brown Americans who have died disproportionately, just as if every bit as much as if there was a cop's knee on their neck. And the ones who haven't died are starving right now, are in food lines. They're being evicted. They don't have health insurance. And so it's like, this is what's really going on. And the good news of 2020 is that this is in the mainstream press.
Yes.
This is no longer just on The Root with Michael Harriot or these sort of second tier reporters who are, he's fucking great. I love Michael Harriot, but
oh yeah, he's great.
But the fact is that you're seeing these articles now that are things that Michael Harriot would have written 5 years ago. They are on the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post, and CNN is reporting on it. And this is a mainstream conversation now, and that's what's changed. That's what 2020 changed.
Yes, absolutely. And well, let's give the Trump administration some credit here, right? Because now people are willing to just call people racists, right? I mean, I remember the first time that I saw I was watching a clip of Anderson 360, and CNN has been in the vanguard of this whole thing anyway. But and this is after the shithole countries comment, and he just said, like, the president's a racist. And it's like, wow, like that is something that you would never have heard 4 years ago. Right? People wouldn't call Trump a racist in 2016.
At all, right? And they also say Trump's a liar. I mean,
yes, a liar. That's another
headlines. Falsehoods, baseless accusations. They are literally calling the president a liar, as they should.
Absolutely, and that is a huge step forward. One of the legacies of Trump will be ripping back the curtain, the veneer of civility that the right has wrapped itself in for so many years, and it's just now just out there. We are going to be doing a show, Reagan to Trump, and it's going to be fucking awesome. And that's going to really rip away that veneer and connect those dots really clearly. But I'm really happy in that sense. That is a silver lining of the Trump era. Doesn't mean that I would have wished this on anybody or on any country, but that is one of the better things. And look, I mean, protests and demonstrations fucking work, right? That is why the right hates them so much, because it really does change public opinion. And I also am optimistic, Sean. And I'm not optimistic much. I usually just say I'm just neither optimistic nor pessimistic, but I am optimistic that when the boomers are out of power, and when Generation X, Y, Z gets, look, we are living through a national trauma right now in a way that the boomers, I'm not sure the boomers really did. I mean, the 60s were the 60s, don't get me wrong, but I don't know that it's the same kind of sacrifice that we've had to make since basically the Greatest Generation, right? Like,
I was just going to say,
as a society, we've had to make real sacrifices, and we've seen real fascism and how democracies destabilize, and that hasn't been seen since the Greatest Generation.
What I can tell you is that growing up, I had plenty of contact with people who lived through World War II and the Great Depression. And those people think very differently from boomers.
They really do.
Boomers are, there's a lot of spoiled people among my generation. I'm at the tail end of the boomer generation. And the reason why the boomers are spoiled is precisely because of the New Deal.
Yes, exactly. And they have no idea. So often, so many of those boomers have no idea that is the stability that they look back at it idyllically. They are literally voting against that right now.
They are. And what the New Deal allowed people to do, and the strength of labor unions in this country, allowed a man with a high school education to work one job for 40 hours a week and support his family and have enough money to have at least one car, if not two, to take vacations, to own a home, all of those things. And you look right now at millennials who are in their 30s, and millennials in their 30s have only 1/4 the net worth of boomers who were in their 30s. And so that translates into a lot of hardship. And so what's happening is that boomers had it too good. Now we're having the hardship, and we could see a pendulum swing back to the understanding of public goods.
Yeah, that is like, to the extent that I have any hope at all, Sean, that I am optimistic at all. That is precisely why I'm optimistic, because the pendulum has swung so far to the right, and the people that are growing up in this environment will now understand how bad it can get. You know what I'm saying? Like, how you can be saddled with debt, how you can live under a quasi-racist fascist regime, which, as I talk about a lot on the show in the 90s, was beyond. I couldn't even comprehend that. I couldn't even comprehend that we'd be having these sort of conversations.
Well, and this is, there's a danger here, and that is that with the millennials and the post-millennial generation that is coming up, you could see such a frustration occur with the system. And I've seen this a lot actually among young people, is just the sense that it's hopelessly broken. It can't be fixed.
Yes.
And that is right where the rich wants you, by the way. The rich, if you're young and you're listening to this, you are absolutely falling into the trap that has been set by the wealthy to make you hopeless, to make you check out, to make you nihilistic, to turn you into an anarchist. Okay. I saw this meme the other day, and it was posted by a person who was in their 20s. And it was basically saying, it had a picture of McConnell and Pelosi and how the government couldn't deliver us the aid that we needed to get through this pandemic. And my comment was, why is Pelosi in there? She passed a bill back in May. So the trap is to this both sidesism.
Yeah.
That is the main defense that the wealthy have against reform, is getting people to check out and engage in this both sidesism. And that could derail any attempt to fix our problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a very, very real possible outcome here, right? I mean, there is no guarantee. And this is why I say all the time, I'm neither pessimistic nor optimistic. I'm just here for it because we talked about earlier in the show, there is a dark side to human nature. There is a bright side to it, right? There is a dark side to a country and to a culture and a bright side to it. And like you said, it is really this checking out sort of idea is really big right now. I mean, and disaffected people don't vote. Disaffected people don't pay attention. Disaffected people are not engaged. And that is how you maintain minority rule. That is precisely how you maintain minority rule, is suppress the vote. But if you can't do it physically, like they would have done during Reconstruction, which is like literally like violently intimidate people, you do it a different way, right? You throw entertainment at people. You throw into sort of both sidesism at people. And like you always say, Sean, is you muddy the waters, right? It's so much easier to build something than to tear it down. I'm sorry. It's so much easier to tear something down than to build it. And so all you have to do if you're on the right, if you are rich, is just muddy the waters a little bit. And then, by the way, the conspiratorial thinking will take it from there.
Yeah. I had a conversation with a guy last night who was railing against education, and he thought that it was a scam and that teachers were, should be basically volunteers. And it was like, I just couldn't even break through this insanity of this person. And it was a young person, a young black man who I was talking to. And I just had to go like, look, dude, like your generation and your kids' generation are desperately going to need free public education.
Oh my God.
Here you are sitting there talking about it as if it's all a scam. And, he said he didn't want people to be indoctrinated. It's like, well, dude, who is the easiest to indoctrinate? Uneducated people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to block him. And what we come back to is that we need to fix the system. Okay. And we are facing unprecedented crises. The 20th century had its own crises. And the biggest one, of course, was World War II, global fascism, the Great Depression, that whole thing that we came out of. But we're going into another era where we're going to be facing cascading crises. And the only way you survive those things is, number one, sound economics, number two, good governance. And those things allow you to build resiliency into your systems. Right now, it's like with this pandemic, it exposed the brittleness of our system. Our systems are extremely brittle and becoming more so every day. And what I mean by that is that there's no fallback position. Like when the economy was running flat out before COVID, everybody was doing okay, but that's because they're getting a paycheck every month. And that makes it all work. But you have one thing go wrong, one thing, which is something that, there's always going to be a crisis of some. Inevitably. Yeah. So the fact that there is not an automatic system in place to provide pandemic relief is insane. Yeah. It's insane. We have, unemployment lasts, I think the most you can get it for is 6 months or something like that. And then you just what are you supposed to do after that? And we have long-term structural unemployment in this country where labor force participation is, I think it's as low as 60%, even before the pandemic. So you got all these people who are either just not working permanently, they're not even looking, and they've fallen out of the system and they're in poverty. And at the same time, we've got, billionaires gaining $1 trillion of wealth that is essentially being stolen from our citizens. And
absolutely.
So it's like the structure of our government and our civilization, it's been gutted. And this is why our series about that we're going to do about Reagan, starting with Reagan, is so important, because it's as if, starting with Reagan, a giant colony of termites has been feeding on the timbers of our nation that were built by Roosevelt in the New Deal and Johnson in the Great Society and all of these programs that were put into place. They've been feeding on these timbers, and no matter how strong and intact our nation might appear with our huge military and all of that, it's become incredibly weak from this 50 years of right-wing assault. And so parts of our nation can collapse unpredictably. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
The same resilience that will protect us against climate change and economic downturns in general will also protect us against future pandemics.
Yeah.
So this is about systems. This is about building systems. This is the one thing that Republicans are terminally allergic to doing. And we have to look at the Republican Party not only as a fascist minority party, but it's also an anti-system insurgency that it was designed to take apart the New Deal. And they're almost done. They've almost broken us completely.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such an important point. And in terms of the systems, right? Because and that final point that you said, they've really found a way to dismantle the New Deal, and that was always the plan. And starting with Reagan, at least, and the whole idea was and they branded it in terms of individualism, in terms of Americanism, in terms of big business is good for America, and it's been successful. But of course the side effects are, well, Trumpism, right? Mm-hmm. It's not without consequence. It's not like the rich just get to take their money and then that's the end of the story. The end of the story is that people are starving and the pitchforks are coming. The only real question, and the pitchforks are here, frankly, the only real question is how, to the extent to which can you suppress the pitchforks. I want to close this section by just thinking in terms of how corporations run. I think it reflects how broken our system is, that corporations run so lean that as soon as one hiccup in the system goes, sort of comes up, they have no liquidity, right? They're over leveraged because they are incentivized. And we talked about earlier how companies firms are intensely rational. They are incentivized to run that way, right? And because they know that, first of all, they'll get a bailout if the system breaks. But second of all, like in order to stay competitive, they have to do stock buybacks. They have to lay people off. They have to run basically on as lean as possible, right? If a company is running that lean, if they are incentivized, and they're intensely rational, they are operating under these conditions. Then when one thing goes wrong, then they can't pay their employees. They can't continue to do what they have to do. And then you get the Great Recession, right? Or you get what we're seeing right now. And then they get bailed out by the taxpayer. But again, it's perpetuating the same broken system. What you have to do is create incentives so that companies are not running so lean, that they have some money in the fucking bank, so they don't have to then just collapse as soon as the system derails. So I think it's really important. Systems are super important. We are moving forward from the MAGA administration, but Trumpism is here with us. And in that vein, let's talk about the future of the show as we close. It's going to be pretty exciting. We have some, I think, new developments for 2021. We are going to launch a kind of revamped show with some new elements starting Inauguration Day or after Inauguration Day. It's going to be a slightly revamped sort of weekly show experience. We have great people that are helping us, not the least of which is Tim and also Sean, right? Because you're really good with this tech stuff on the back end. Everybody doesn't know that, but like Sean is like, Sean does all of like the back end work of making this show look the way it looks and sound the way it sounds. It does not happen just by pressing record. That takes actual work, right, Sean?
Yeah, I'm not, we try to maintain good production values. I listen to a lot of podcasts where you just can't hear people. So, we process our audio to make sure that you can actually hear us. And we have the show format, which it's very basic at this point, but it's going to get better. We're doing a little more on that front with our new look and everything else like that. So it's more like an actual TV show. So yeah, that's what I do. And I wish that I wish we had the budget and the staff, because guess what? when you actually watch the show on TV, there are, many people involved in making that happen. It's not just one person. So we do our best here.
Yeah, we do our best. But we really are excited. We are going to relaunch a website. We're going to launch a blog that's separate from Facebook, right? And we also are going to add our friend Joe Acapinti as a more regular feature on the show. We have some other ideas in development. And by the way, contact us with your ideas. We'd love to talk to you. And look, let's talk about some of the shows that we have coming up, Sean, sort of tease what we're going to be talking about in the next couple of weeks. I know I'm going to be hosting a show on the 9th where we're going to be talking about superheroes, and we're going to be talking about the show called The Boys on Amazon. We're going to be talking about the Mirror universe in Star Trek Discovery, and we're going to have a friend of ours come on the show. Drew is going to come on the show to sort of talk to us about that. What are you excited about for next year, Sean?
I can't even tell you how excited I am about our episode about The Boys. Now, first of all,
it's going to be so good.
The show The Boys, if you haven't watched it,
go watch it now. Watch it now.
That is must-see TV. That is probably the best series I've ever seen in terms of a satire on modern America, on Trumpism. It has it all. It's everything. Just watch the show. There's 16 episodes of it so far. I think it's been renewed for a third season. Mm-hmm. It is smart, cutting, pulls no punches.
No punches. It pulls no punches. It is intense. And by the way, I was reading watching a interview of Homelander, the main character, one of the main characters, and he says that he read the graphic novels based on a graphic novel, and he said the show makes a graphic novel the show makes a graphic novel seem it's a tame version of the graphic novel, just to put things in perspective, because the show is intense, and I can only imagine what that graphic novel must have been like. But yeah, it really is outstanding. I definitely recommend that you watch all 16 episodes. My wife and I have been watching it together, so we've been watching a little bit slower. We still have 4 more episodes, I think, or maybe 3 more episodes to finish the second season. But really outstanding television.
What I want to say about it also is it's really a shame that they called it The Boys, because you have no concept of what this show is about.
Right.
It's really, really, it's a shame. They did everything else right. But the title, I heard about it when it came out, but I was like, why do I want to watch this? I had no concept of what this show really was, which is just the most cutting satire on modern America that's ever been produced.
It really, really is so good. Production value is excellent. And there's so many different layers of it, right? And we will talk about this on the show, but there is the superhero element of it. There is the corporate power element of it. There is you can go on and on, but it really is so well done. And Drew is going to talk to us about it, which I think is going to be a lot of fun, because I was chatting with him and asking him whether or not he could come on the show, and he is really into this sort of thing, and so I think he is a lot of fun to talk to. I also found out that I knew we were both Bad Religion fans, but I didn't realize that he actually works for Epitaph Records and stuff like that. So that's going to be like an interesting element of that conversation as well. And then the other thing that I'm really excited about, and besides us being able to have some really fun guests on and talk, and we are still sort of, you and I are still talking about how we're going to do this, but the Reagan to Trump thing, right? I think that it's super, super important that we connect those dots for people. I think it really will help put all of what's been going on in 2020, et cetera, into context.
Yeah, and I think I've really been looking forward to this, because I want to start getting deeper into some of our source material. And the probably foundational book for this entire series is The Reactionary Mind. And I think we can break down a chapter of that book per show, and we can weave that in with some of our other topics, because it touches on everything. So I'm looking forward to starting that with Reagan, and then really tracing this lineage of thought back to its origins in Edmund Burke, who is Edmund
Absolutely.
Burke is a villain, an epic villain of all time, as far as preserving and prolonging hierarchy and dominance and injustice. So we're going to really talk a lot about him, and he is still considered to be some kind of fucking intellectual, and he should be vilified. He should be pilloried. He should be, our fantasy, of course, is put in the fucking industrial wood chipper feet first. Because, this is his ideas are the basis of most of the injustice that we've seen in the world, going all the way back to the beginning of time.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And again, I say this a lot on the show. We say this a lot on the show, is that a conservatism is a meditation on, and this is from the book, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but a meditation on the justification of and defense of unaccountable power. Like, that is what conservatism at its core is, and it's certainly in terms of Edmund Burke. And going forward. So anyway, I want to, we're sort of wrapping up here, but I want to finally thank this year's guests because we just love having these great conversations with everybody. We've changed how we do guests, right? We used to have the guests for the entire show. Now we do a guest segment, and we really have evolved this show over time. But let's go back. John Kierbo, Jordana Thigpen, Joe Acapinti. We love Joe Acapinti. Matthew Remski, Meg Walker, Joe Zimhart, Ari Venezia Zahemsky, Baird Lewis, and Justice Bartlett. We were actually on their show. And Bob Donaldson. And of course, Joe Acapinti was back for, he is a 3-time guest on our show and going to be a part of our show going forward to some extent at least. And so we're really grateful to all of you for your time, for your expertise. And if you're listening, thank you so much. And I also want to list an incomplete list of our most loyal listeners. Again, Joe Acapinti makes that list as well. Dan Teeter, Drew Scott, Patricia Nolan Stein, Daryl Collins. You have been mentioned before on the show because you are people that and I know there's many others out there. Then thank you so much for listening. And look, I mean, it's just been a lot of fun having you all on the show, having you listen. And look, I don't know. I just feel like that's something we should say. I know. I just think it's important to say that. And Sean, we are about time, but I want to sort of give you the opportunity to, I don't know, like comment and final thoughts.
Yeah, okay. I want to get in my little rant about New Year's and year ends and everything else like that.
Perfect way to end it.
Okay, because we obviously wish everybody a happy New Year. Let's get that out of the way, because
hashtag 24 to 2020.
We are turning a page. We're turning a page. That's good. But the way we reckon time is as meaningless as the borders between nations. Okay. You go into space. You don't see any borders between nations. Maybe the Great Wall is maybe the only one you might see from space. And this is the same thing with time. You look at the Earth from space, and there is no line anywhere in Earth's orbit. It's a circle, and it just continues. Okay. So 2021 is not magically going to be different from 2020. We could face greater crises in 2021 than what we faced this year. It's always an unknown. And that's, I think, what's important to recognize, is that whenever people start making these artificial categories of times and dates, decades, years, whatever, it allows a lot of really fuzzy thinking. And, I think that the title of our show, which is Hindsight is 2020, is good. It's clever, but at the same, and it's great to put that in our rearview mirror, but we have a lot more challenges coming up. And I think this whole entire decade is likely to be full of challenges. And so brace yourselves, because it's still coming. And
absolutely,
even with Biden in there, even as hopeful as we all are, we've got tough challenges, because this authoritarian cabal they're not finished. They're not done. And they made major gains during the 2020 election, aside from the presidency. So, and we've got the Supreme Court now. So this is something. Happy New Year, but be ready.
Yeah, I think that's really important, man. It's super, super important, because this idea, this is what happened, I think, back when Obama was elected. This idea that people got to just check out after that. Like, oh, Obama's got it. right? And I think that is these sort of artificial boundaries that we put as if like something has now radically changed because someone else is in the White House. No, all the systems, the bad systems, the broken systems are still churning away, and people are skimming money out of it, and skimming power out of it more than anything else. So, well, look, that's our show. Sean, awesome. Thank you so much. Obviously, you're my brother, you're my friend, you're my partner. I'm just grateful to be doing this with you, man. And everyone out there, I want to remind you to make sure to subscribe to this podcast, leave us a good rating, write a review for our show, tell your friends and family about us. Word of mouth really does matter. And look, wherever you are, remember, you can be radically secular.